If you are a private investigator or somebody who would hire a private investigator, whether a consumer or a law firm or an attorney, you need to know about this story. This is an example, not just an isolated example, because we're going to talk about 2 or 3 other examples of where engagement with a private investigator can cause huge liabilities and get people into big trouble, even criminal trouble, if it's not done carefully. This is a case where a party to a lawsuit, so the lawsuit was about a personal injury case. A person was driving a car, crashed into another person, and caused injury. And the injured person was suing for compensation for their injury. Well, the person they were suing was doing surveillance on the injured person just to make sure they were really injured. They were saying they couldn't use their arms and they had all these other injuries. So the plaintiff or the defendant hired a private investigator to watch them, to say, well, are they lifting up hay bales? Are they really doing work? Or are they really injured? So that was a normal thing to do surveillance. And people do surveillance all the time for divorce cases, for fraud cases, for all kinds of different cases to do surveillance. Well, look at this picture. This is a mock-up of where the surveillance was. See this house right here? That's where the injured person lived. Here's their driveway. And this black line is a dirt road that accessed the driveway. The private investigator set up over here in this car. And the car was observing, filming people that were on this property. Here's the problem. This square right here, this picture, this is the property boundaries. The investigator figured that, well, here's the road, this black line, the property boundary, the property parcel must be over here in between the road and the house. Well, come to find out, this dirt road went through their property, and there's some other houses over here as an easement. So other owners of properties, neighbors, could go on this dirt road. So in effect, this private investigator was parked on the property owned by the injured person, unbeknownst to them. They never bothered to do a title search, to do a survey, to look at property records, to find out where they were parked. And they were using magnification of their camera to zoom in on the people they were doing surveillance on. Turns out, if you're a private investigator and you know the laws, that's illegal. It's improper to, first of all, trespass on somebody's property and to magnify the results. So what is the answer to this? Well, the defendant in the case found out that they were trespassing. So they sued the private investigator because they said they were severely harmed by the actions, and the lawyers and a private investigator firm and 5 private investigators individually. They demanded $13 billion in trespass and invasion of privacy claims. Are they going to win $13 billion? Who knows? But it's a lot of money. Either way, it's clear cut that they did something that was improper. What is the takeaway from this? If you are a law firm, if you are a plaintiff, if you are a civilian, and you hire a private investigator, you need to make sure that the actions they are taking are legal. And this goes not just for surveillance, but other types of research. For example, if you're pulling records on a person, you have to do it legally. There's a federal law called the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. It prohibits, you can use certain methods to get information like assets or background or those kind of things, but you can't do things illegally. You can't call up a bank and say, hey, I'm Joe Schmo, give me my bank statement, if you're really not Joe Schmo. You can't falsify records to get copies of cell phones, billing documents. You can't do things like send false invoices to get people to respond to. There's many, many things that are illegal that investigators can't do, that if you do them, not only are you going to get in trouble as a private investigator, but you're also going to get your client in trouble, the law firm. Look, this lawsuit is not just against the investigator, it's against the insurance company that is the plaintiff, the defense lawyers, a private investigative firm, and the investigators individually. Right? So all these people could have liability. And even if you win the case, how much are you going to spend defending it? make sure that any investigative firm that you work with has the experience, knowledge of that area. Our firm, we don't do surveillance. We only do asset searches, fraud investigations, things that are in our practice area. Part of the reason we don't do surveillance is for this reason. This is not our expertise, right? Surveillance requires certain knowledge. In some parts of the country, you can use devices that enhance audio and visual. You can use parabolic microphones. You can use zoom cameras. Some parts of the country you can't, right? There's also rules about what's called curtilage. Can you pull trash from a subject? Sometimes you can, as long as you don't trespass. Some places you can't, even if it's out by the street. Knowing all these laws, the whens and wheres and hows, is important because you're putting yourself and your clients at risk. So if you are a potential client and you want to hire a private investigator, you want to make sure that they're going to do things the right way. Look, as investigators, we get asked all the time by clients, hey, can you do this? And they ask us to do something. That thing they're asking for is illegal. They may not know it's illegal, right? They may not be aware. They're not trying to do anything to break the law in most cases, but what they're asking for is illegal. Another case that happened back in the early 2000s, we had a case where there was a client who was involved in a lawsuit. It was a suit and countersuit. And we were doing investigations for one of the parties to this suit. And both parties were suing each other. So as part of our investigative services, we're doing asset searches, background checks on the other side. And we always do counterintelligence for our client. We tell them, look, be aware that the other side may also be doing these types of investigations on you. In more than half the cases, a private investigator is going to do something wrong. They're going to break the rules. And the reason for that is many private investigators are just a single sole proprietor. Joe Schmo private investigator working from their basement. They're not a larger agency that is more sophisticated and experienced. And Joe Schmo private investigator probably doesn't keep up on all the laws that they have to keep up on. So what did this investigator do? This investigator wanted to find out how much our clients had in the bank. So how did they do it? They did not go through the right channels to do a GLB compliant proper bank account search. What they did was they made up a fake check. They had a fake company out in California. They put a few $100s into an account and they made up a fake check that said USA Rebate Company or something like that. They mailed it to our customer with a letter that said, hey, congratulations. Thanks for buying your products from USA Manufactured Services. Here's your rebate check. And it was like $20 or $15. Hoping that our client would sign the check, deposit it in their account, and they could see on the back of the check what the account was and they could find out the balance. This is illegal. This is what's called pretexting, illegal pretexting. So we told our client to be on the lookout for anything suspicious, anybody watching you, any weird financial transactions. Fortunately, when they got this thing in the mail, it raised a red flag. And they said, I got this thing in the mail. What should we do with it? So we asked them to bring us the check. We did some research on the check. We tracked down the P.O. box and all the information. Come to find out, it traced back to a private investigative agency that wasn't in California. It was in the state where this case was happening. So we did some research on that private investigator and we found that they have done work in the past for this law firm that was representing the counterparty. So put two and two together. Because of that, we told our client and their attorney went to court and got subpoenas and got depositions, and they admitted, yeah, we did this. We didn't know it was wrong. We do it all the time. And so because of that discovery, they had to do some very serious negotiations with the case. And it benefited the client. Whether or not the client would have won anyways, who knows? But just catching that kept the client out of more legal jeopardy. Another example of where breaching the rules that sometimes aren't even known can create a problem was there was a case back in the 90s where a major Fortune 500 company, a large tech company, had some statements that were coming out in the press about their company that only could have come from within their board of directors. Things that were discussed in their board meetings were being revealed and released in media, on CNN, newspapers, that kind of thing. So they have to find out, look, somebody in our board of directors, is disclosing this information. They're releasing this information. How do we find out? Well, what they did was they hired a private investigator, and it was their CFO, a very high-level executive in this company, hired a private investigator and told them, I want you to get the cell phone records of all of our board of directors so we can scroll through them to see which ones are calling up a reporter. We can look at all the numbers and see which one has a number of a reporter. And they did that. The private investigator got all the cell phone records for all these board members. They did it illegally. And sure enough, they found that one of the board members was calling up a reporter from a major publication. So the executives of this company called this board member in and said, we know you're calling the reporter and we're kicking you off the board and all this kind of stuff. They didn't know it was illegal to do this. Come to find out, the board member knew that this was improper, filed a complaint, and I believe, if I remember correctly, one of the executives of this company actually had a criminal prosecution. I'm not sure if they went to jail or they just had a criminal record, criminal judgment against them. But the company had to pay millions in fines, and people had serious problems over a small thing like a media leak. Think about the high level of people. You had an executive of a company and a private investigator who did not know what they were doing was wrong. They talked about it in email, so they weren't trying to hide it. Make sure that if you're working with a case, that you have very good vetting of the processes done. Just because you have an investigator do something doesn't get you off the hook as a client from being liable if something is done improperly.